I'm Shireen Shahawi, the Executive Director of the Friends of the Kotzschmar organ, and we are trying something completely new for us. James Kennerley is here to answer a few of your questions before our concert tomorrow night, Back with Bach. As many of you know, we're having our first concert here on the Merrill stage since the auditorium closed down in March. Live stream. James will be performing live, not to an audience here, but to people all around the world. We have over 1,000 people who have reserved seats for this concert right now, so we're very excited. But I'm going to bring James out so we can ask him some questions. Some questions got sent to us when people saw this post for this this Facebook Live. So here's James Kennerley.
Hey everyone, it's great to welcome you here. I'm sad not to be able to welcome you to Merrill Auditorium in person, although one of the silver linings of this online concert is that a lot more people than would normally join us are able to be with us virtually, so that's a really nice thing. And we thought it would be fun to do a Facebook Live event where you could ask me questions that if saying, oh, I just want to ask him why he played this piece, or why he chose those sounds, or why he moved his feet in that particular way. I thought that this would be a nice occasion for you guys to do that. So Shireen, maybe I thought I would just talk a little bit about the program very briefly. And then maybe you could come up with some other questions that we have.
Share with you when
Fabulous.
You're ready.
So the program, first of all, if you haven't reserved your tickets yet, go to portix, portix.g, and you can reserve tickets. You will get an online link, and then you'll be able to watch the live stream. And I believe we will be archiving it for at least a few days. So if you don't manage to catch it right there and then, you might be able to catch it afterwards. But it's always fun to watch these things live so that you know that what I'm doing is exactly what you're experiencing. Minus a few seconds for the internet and all of that fun stuff. So the program is really Bach's greatest hits with some other fun music thrown in. And probably the most famous piece that you'll hear is D minor. Those first few notes, even if you don't know organ music or if you don't like organ music, it's often associated with Halloween. And so from that and a few other pieces that would have been played on sort of popular Bach organ programs, I filled in the blanks with some pieces that I really love and work brilliantly here on the Kotzschmar organ. And it's a fun way to celebrate J.S. Bach and his compositions for organ. Not all of these pieces were written for the organ, certainly not by Bach for the organ. The first piece I'm playing is actually a transcription that I made. So I took an orchestral score and transferred it for the organ. And a couple of pieces Bach himself transcribed. He wrote them for an orchestra or for voices, and then he himself took that material and transferred it onto the organ. So it's not just straight up organ music. We're going to have some really fun transcriptions as well. So Shireen, why don't you fire away with
Well, let me ask the first question. This is from John in Southern Maine. He asked about the transcription process because he noticed on our website that it's a transcription by James Kennerley.
Yeah.
How long did that take you? How long does that take?
Well, that's a really good question. The first thing is to think about why we transcribe stuff. One of the main reasons is that the organ is an orchestra. We have especially this organ, we have all of these sounds like flutes, clarinets, oboes, violins, and strings in general. And so this organ is designed to replicate instruments of the orchestra. I played a little trumpet sound just then. I mean, we have a million sounds like a French horn, an English horn, and a clarinet, as well as a bassoon. All kinds of fun things like trumpet and flute. As I mentioned, etc. So that's one of the reasons that we transcribe music. And of course, the reason also is that it wasn't written for the organ, and there's lots of great music by composers like Bach and others who didn't write their pieces expressly for the organ, but yet they work brilliantly on the organ. And so this piece, the first piece that I'm actually opening with, is a cantata. So a cantata is a piece to be sung. Cantata, cantate, is the Latin to sing. And Bach wrote hundreds of these for his choir throughout his career, but most famously when he was the music director, the cantor at the St. Thomas Church, the Thomaskirche in Leipzig. And that was sort of the pinnacle of his career. He was there from 1923 until he died in 1723 until 1750 when he died. And so the cantatas often open with an instrumental number, which we would call a symphonia, or a symphony. And this particular cantata was written in 1731. It was written for the opening of the town council. So Bach was employed by the city council, the town council, and this was the opening ceremony of that group. And so the title, Wir danken dir, wir danken, means we thank thee, God, we thank thee. And I always think in the back of Bach's mind, or maybe not so much in the back, he was thinking, we thank you for giving me my budget, approving my expenses this year. And so he wrote this really celebratory symphonia to the cantata, which itself is fantastic. And it's really celebratory because it uses trumpets. So Bach's orchestra has, if he's a little bit more adventurous, maybe woodwinds, flutes, and oboes. But if he's feeling regal and really happy, he adds the trumpets and the timpani. And so this piece has a line for 3 trumpets, and they play a melody that sounds like this. And so we add a 2-part to that, and then we add the 3rd part. So you imagine the 3 trumpeters standing. These aren't trumpets with valves. They have sort of finger positions. They're beautifully looking trumpets with a really thin, piercing, pure tone. And so what Bach does, of course, because he's Bach and he's a genius, he adds an organ melody on top of that. So we heard the trumpets. He adds this melody. Now, if you're a violinist, you might recognize that. It sounds more like this. So it's the first movement of the E major violin partita. And Bach stole, like he did, and all his colleagues and contemporaries did, from himself, and some even stole from others. So Bach took that idea, he put it into a new key, D major, took it away from the violin and added it to the organ solo. So now you have these several parts. Notice how many hands I'm using. The trumpets. So if I were a pianist, I'm out of, my game is up. My 2 hands have already been used. I can't do anything else. But Bach's orchestral music always has a bass line. We call that the basso continuo, and it's really important. And if you can kind of see, I think you can in the camera, and if not, go to our website and see loads of videos showing the organ and the console. I have a whole load of feet pedals that I can play. Obviously with my feet. So that enables me to play the full transcription. I've got the trumpets, and I've got the organ part, and I've got the bass part. So I'm going to put all 3 of those together. So that is why the organ is a fantastic instrument for transcriptions. And it's, of course, one of the reasons that we transcribe, because Bach didn't write this piece for the solo organ, and yet it works really well. So that's a long-winded way of explaining how and why we transcribe things and how they work on this amazing instrument, which is the best organ in the world, just so we know.
Of course it is. Thea from Falmouth had a question for you. Mm-hmm. Do you have a personal favorite on this list that you are on tomorrow night's list?
Oh boy. That's like asking which is your favorite child.
I know.
Because I love them all. I only have one, as far as I know. But in terms of the pieces, it really depends on the mood. Oh my goodness. Well, I love the Passacaglia in C minor. That doesn't sound like this, but it's... starts out with this line, and it keeps repeating, and Bach adds different layers on top of it. And then eventually he turns it into a fugue. So that's probably one of my favorites. It was one of the first pieces I heard that I loved. I've got to say, I love the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. As a kid, when I first heard that, I remember I would play it on the loudest setting I could get our stereo system to make, and of course the speakers would crackle and distort and almost explode with smoke. So that's got to be one of my tops. And then I think, you know, depending on the day, probably one of the chorale preludes. I'm playing two, and they're taken from a collection called the Schubler chorales. And Schubler was the man who printed them. He engraved them, so he took Bach's music and engraved it on copper plates and then printed them up. And then Bach sold them and made a little bit of money out of them. And the chorale preludes use melodies. The German hymn tunes are called chorales. And so Bach takes the chorales and hides them sort of within a texture, musical texture. And the way he does it is just so beautiful and subtle and utterly genius that I think those are probably some of my favorite pieces. They're not loud and flashy, but have a little listen to this. The melody sounds like this. Sometimes it's called Wachet auf. In this country, we sometimes sing that to Wake, awake, O night is flying. Wake, awake, O night is flying, the watchman, da 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 da. It's normally in C major. So it's not quite so high to sing the top note. But so everyone would have known this melody, and Bach would have known it, as many of us do, as an Advent hymn tune. So that's the season just before Christmas. So you've heard that melody. Now you have to pick it out. Etc. So that's a great example, probably of one of my favorite pieces on the program. Very beautiful, and just sort of the highest form of Bach's art.
One person did ask, Dean from Portland, asked, which of the pieces tomorrow night is probably the most difficult for anyone to play?
Oh boy. Well, I think the one that I played just at the beginning, which is the Symphonia to the Vier Danken Day, that cantata. I don't have all my stops here, but that's pretty tricky because I only have myself to blame. The way that I wrote it, it uses the trumpet sound, and it's sort of jumping around between those sounds and then more sounds up on this keyboard. So the hands are really flying across the keyboards. Now, when Bach played his organ music, he almost certainly would have stayed to one keyboard and then maybe for another clear section moved to a different one. He probably wouldn't have jumped around like this. This is a very modern concept. So that makes it really tricky, and because it's a transcription, I'm playing stuff with my feet, you know, that you probably wouldn't write if Bach were writing that as a solo organ piece. But probably also the D major Prelude and Fugue. That is the final piece, and that starts with a... So it starts with a scale. You notice I wasn't using my hand. So it starts with a scale in the feet, and at the end it has this crazy section with a big pedal solo. So I think that, in terms of pure virtuosity, that's a piece that Bach wrote. He wrote it for the organ. We know that he will have performed it. He will have had his poor students perform it. So that's probably the hardest piece. I don't know. They're all pretty tricky. But even with Bach, the simplest and the smallest of details, like in keyboard terms, we call it the articulation. That's if you play legato or staccato, and just about every infinitesimal gap in between those two extremes. that just takes judgment, and that kind of judgment is one of the things that makes playing Bach so satisfying, but also really difficult, because if you get it just right, you know it, and it's like, perfect. If something is just off, or one of the sounds you choose, it speaks a bit late, it takes a little bit of time to make the noise, or you have a note that's out of tune or something, then it can upset the apple cart. So sometimes the simplest of pieces by Bach are also the most difficult to play.
Excellent. We are hearing from a mutual friend of ours, a board member, Larry in Scarborough.
Excellent.
He's asking, how does the Kotzschmar differ from the St. Thomas Kirk organ that Bach composed for?
Oh boy. Well,
he's asking the hard ones.
Yeah. So this is a question: how does this organ, the mighty Kotzschmar organ, differ from the organ that Bach would have played in the Thomaskirche, the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, where he was for the last quarter century of his career? Well, I think of it this way: if we turned up, if we went back in time and looked at Bach's organ, we would absolutely recognize it. That's partly because we have organs that have survived from his time, not many, but also we have a lot of historical information that we can recreate the organs of his time, and that they better than their original versions. So in that sense, if we went to Bach, we would understand his organ and recognize it. If he came to us, however, I think he would be utterly confused. First of all, there are lights in here. Well, apart from the fact there's a phone which is broadcasting our live conversation around the world, he probably wouldn't get that yet. But there are lights in here. That would have been utterly foreign to him. There's also this massive organ case and the sound of wind rushing. You probably shouldn't be hearing that because it's meant to be all sealed, but tiny bits of wind escapes the wind chest. And that takes, in Bach's day, would have taken someone pumping the bellows. Probably the choristers whose voices is broken and they were pretty much useless to him, they would be pumping the bellows. Sometimes you can kind of step on these big, massive pedals, like one of those Peloton bikes that everybody's doing now, or you would pull them down by hand, a combination of the two, perhaps. So he would be intrigued that this wind is just going and going and going, of course, driven nowadays by electricity, but it means that I can play for the organ for hours and hours and hours and hours, and it's always going to have sound. Bach would have had to get people to light the candles and to pump the organ so he could see and hear the playing. But Bach did have instruments. He visited and played instruments that had up to 4 keyboards. So we have 4 keyboards here, and the organs he played would have been not nearly as large as the Kotzschmar, but similar in size. I mean, we're talking, if we have 120 stops here, he would have played instruments with 60 stops. Actually, one of my favorite books brought along for my show and tell, I'm going to bring it up to you here, is by one of my old teachers, Christoph Wolff, and it's the organs of J.S. Bach. And so what they did, but they went to all the places that exist in Bach's time, all the organs that he wrote, and the organs that people wrote that he went to visit. And here, for example, this is the organ console in a place, the Neue. And so this, you see, has the stops on the sides, has only 2 keyboards, and a very small pedal board, but nonetheless, we have a very, very similar, keyboards, we have stops either side, and we have pedals down below. So I think Bach would have recognized those elements if he wasn't overwhelmed by the electricity and other things like that. But he would not, of course, recognize the sounds on this organ. I played some of them earlier. We also have really cool things, like a marimba. We have a glockenspiel. And a xylophone. In addition to other cool things like chimes, triangles, fire gongs, train whistles, doorbells, car horns, and tweeting birds, as well as a whole rafter of percussion. So Bach would never have have understood why and how those instruments came to be played on the organ. But we have them.
Okay, so our last question, because it's getting to be close to 7:30, from Justin. He says or asks, what do you like most about the Kotzschmar organ, stop or sound-wise?
Oh, that's also a difficult question, like the favorite piece of Bach. Now, I'm going to give you some ideas. This organ has lots of particular pipes, which we call strings. I'm going to show you very quickly. There are 3 types of organ sounds. The main one, if you see the case of the organ, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but if you see most pictures of pipe organs, they have those nice, shiny metal pipes. And those are called diapason, or principal pipes. They make a sound like this. So that's sort of the classic, unique organ sound. It's not designed to imitate an orchestra instrument or a piano or anything. That is unique to the organ. Some of the other sounds are called flutes, and they're made sometimes from different materials, often wood, and sometimes they have a stopper in the top of the pipe that makes it a little bit more muffled. It also does stuff to the pitch, makes the pitch lower, and they just sound generally more gentle. Then the third type of sounds are the strings. And the way you make a string pipe, you think of the width of the diapasons will be like this. Well, the width of the string pipes are much narrower, and that makes a much thinner nasal sound. You think of constricting to make a nasal voice. Well, that's what the string pipes are. Now listen to that. So this organ is the king or the queen of string sounds. I'm just going to play you a few so you get a sense of what they sound like. So those last few seconds of music were played at the very back of the hall, at 100 feet up in the air, and the echo and the antiphonal division. So those strings, they really define this organ, and they are just wonderful. It's like driving a Rolls Royce from the 1920s. I've never done that, but I imagine it's exactly how it felt. You are just invincible, and it's as smooth as butter, as they say.
I'm going to say 2 more. Viewer named Judy, who says that this is a great experience because decades ago her organ teacher was Mr. Douglas Rafter, another municipal organist, and she loves hearing the awesome organ again. So that's very cool
fantastic.
when people have that history.
Nice.
I want to ask something about the antiphonal because I've lived in Portland forever and never really paid attention to that sound that comes from above. Does every organ have that kind of surround sound feeling? Or
every organ wants to have that kind of surround sound feeling. Very rarely do they. There are instruments that have antiphonal divisions offered at churches. If the organ is at one end, you'll have some pipes at the other, often what we would call a chamade, which just means a sound that sounds a little bit like this. It sort of sticks out, sounds like a heraldic military trumpet. Those are often located at one end. And some organs, like the Wolsey Hall organ at Yale University, which is also one of my favorite instruments, has an echo division that's sort of hidden within the back of the chamber. And a few other organs as well. The Wanamaker organ at Macy's, which is absolutely stunning instrument, has sort of, the organ comes from all different places. But one of the reasons I love this antiphonal division is you really can't tell where it's coming from. And you're in the space, even though I know exactly where it is. You listen back to the organ and you just can't tell. It, like you said, it's like surround sound. It just envelops you. It's like, it's magic. If it were up to me, I'd call them the magic divisions, because the sound they make are magical. You cannot tell where it's coming from. It's otherworldly. It's like something.
It's like the angels.
Exactly. The musical angels. And as I showed earlier, it does contain some of the most beautiful sounds on the organ. So,
well, I'm just going to say that when we're back in the hall and when people can be back with us, I think it's really exciting, because if you've heard the organ many times, but you've never really thought about that, all of a sudden I think you start to understand just how the breadth, you know, of the sound in this space. But I'm just going to let you wrap it up with anything you want to say.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I find, again, I was going to do my show and tell here. I have a couple of cool things to show you guys. One of them is, you know, we don't want to get boring and historical, but when we play the music of Bach, we often refer to historical performance, historically informed performance. That basically means going back to the sources of the time, like descriptions of how Bach played, the instruments we know he played, the way that they built them, the sounds that they had, and things like that. And also the music that they wrote, because a lot of this music on this program was not recorded in Bach's own hand. It's like finding the diary of somebody, but the diary is written by somebody else. It might be written by their child, it might be written by one of their former pupils, it might be written by someone who didn't really like them or didn't even know them at all. So imagine if someone wrote the story about you 100 years after you died, or said that you wrote a piece of music that you may not have done. That's one of the challenges and one of the fun things about playing the music of Bach. And music from the 17th century and 18th century and before that, and of course after that. But going back to my point about the sources, I'm going to show you the source for the Toccata and Fugue in a very elaborate hand from about 1740. Now, we're pretty sure that Bach wrote this piece before then, so this is already a second-hand copy. And it says Toccata con fuga. It has pedals. Di, or by, it's written in Italian because that's kind of the language of music, Johann Sebastian Bach. And then scriptus, so written by Johannes Reinkel, or Reinken, I'm not exactly sure, Reinken probably. So that's the guy who wrote this music out. But if I turn to the music itself, this is written probably during Bach's lifetime, but not by him. And if you can read music, you can see up here, da-da-da, da-da-da-dum-bum, da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-dum-bum. And then it has a big note down here which says P, that means you play it with the pedals. And so this is a good example of you know, how Bach's music is transmitted to us. And another way we know how Bach played is one of my favorite books in the whole world. It's called the New Bach Reader. If you like Bach or music, you should get yourself one of these copies. You can buy it on. It's filled with all the anecdotes from Bach's life. So diary entries, you get a lot of entries about Bach being paid in beer. He liked his beer and he drank a huge amount of it. So you can see how he was paid and how much he was entitled. We hear about Bach getting into brawls. He got into a fight with an oboist, a colleague of his, a student who got things wrong and Bach didn't like it, so they got into a fight on the bridge. You can hear about how Bach wrote about organs. He went and played different instruments. And then people who studied with Bach who said, you know, the great Kapellmeister Bach used to play music in this way, or he liked music composed in this way. So that's another way, a fantastic way that we can get to know Bach the person. We're never going to totally know, but we get a sense of who he was, and specifically the music to get to know the performing style that Bach may have been used to. and then that will influence, it won't necessarily dictate, we're not trying to recreate what Bach did, but we certainly want to be influenced by it so that we get an extra layer of meaning on top of the music. So, speaking of the music, I can just urge you to, if you haven't already reserved your tickets, it's a free concert. This is a gift to the city of Portland, to the state of Maine, to the United States, and really to the world, because we're aware that we are so fortunate to be here doing concerts. This stage is normally teeming with musicians at this time, from the symphony and the opera and the ballet and Broadway shows and comedians and everybody, and it's just been dark. I mean, not literally, because we've been able to put the lights on and get in and practice, but it's sort of a bittersweet feeling being here, because so many of my colleagues are not able to perform, and yet because we're a one-man band and we don't have to have anybody else involved, we're able to do concerts. And even though you can't be here with us in person, I really hope you'll join us live. So visit our website, foko.org, and you can reserve your free tickets, and then you will get a YouTube link, and you can download the program and check out the program notes and read more about the music. And if you have any other questions, leave them in the comments below, and we'll be able to get back to you maybe during the concert itself. If not, we'll be able to perhaps write in the comments section. And if not, join our email list so you can keep in touch with us. And one day, if you can, come and hear this amazing organ live. Bach walked 250 miles to go and hear his great teacher Buxtehude in Lübeck. I'm not suggesting you walk, but if you can drive or take a train or take a plane when it's safe, then come and hear this organ. Like Shireen said, there is nothing like being here. We can have the best technology in the world, the best microphones, the best speakers, the best cameras, and that will do a lot to bring you into this experience. But there is nothing quite like being here in person, feeling that the organ shake you to your core, hearing those sounds that are so quiet you almost think there's no sound happening, and all of the colors and things in between. So I think that's pretty much it.
I think that's it too. And if you have any trouble, if you need an account at Portix in order, I'm learning this,
right,
in order to do this online. If you don't know your login or anything like that, just drop an email to info@foko.org, and we will take care of you. We will send you the link directly, because we want everyone to be here.
That sounds great. Awesome.
All right.
Well,
so
thanks everyone for watching. Looking
Thank
forward to
you.
seeing you on Saturday, 7 p.m.